This upcoming episode was recorded last year, and we believe this episode is just as meaningful today as it was when it was released. With multiple demonstrations against racial injustice, a rising movement in hate, our guest, Christian Picciolini, a former white supremacist and leader of the first neo-Nazi skinhead gang, has left the hate movement and now dedicated himself to help others counter racism and extremism. He now leads the Free Radicals Project, a global extremism prevention, and has spoken all over the world, including on the TEDx stage, teaching all who are willing to learn about building greater peace through empathy and compassion. Enjoy the show.
I'm Chanda with Conversations with Chanda, part of the Minneapolis Foundation podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start out and just ask each of you to just introduce yourself to our listener, and I will start out with you, sir.
Hey, Keith Ellison here. I'm the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, and I have been concerned about how Minnesotans get along with each other for quite a long time. So I'm really pleased that Christian Picciolini is here today to talk with us.
Hi, I'm Christian Picciolini. I'm here with my friend, Attorney General Keith Ellison, in Minnesota to talk about a rising environment of hate and intolerance and what we can do about it.
And so we have a lot of Minnesotans that are very comfortable in their lanes and in their communities of comfort is what I like to talk about. And the Minneapolis Foundation has been doing a lot of work to figure out how do we talk about issues that are grittier or things that are happening that need to be amplified in that and people being made more aware of them. And so it's a bit shocking to me that there's a growing sort of movement of hate here in Minnesota. And is that true?
Chanda, I should probably have included in my introduction that I'm also a former violent extremist. I now run an organization called the Free Radicals Project to help people disengage from hate. And what I've seen happen over the last 20 years is a very steady increase and buildup of what we're seeing today and calling a white nationalist movement. This was something that in the 80s and 90s was very visible. But then in the late 90s went underground for several reasons. Because they thought it would be more effective to recruit people in the mainstream, but also because there was tremendous pressure from law enforcement during the 80s and 90s for that. So it was a dual-pronged strategy, both to kind of go underground to hide, but also to go underground to reach more people with their message.
And when you say underground, what you mean is like you're not walking around with like your head shaved and tats showing. Is that kind of the thing? Or like, what does it look like now? How did it resurface?
I call it boots to suits. So in the 80s and 90s, there was very much the shaved heads and the boots and the tattoos and the Klan hoods and things like that. And they were people in this movement were very visible. They were easy to spot, even for law enforcement. But then there was a strategy to really grow the hair out, to not get tattoos, to disengage from groups that were active, because we recognized that at the time it was easier for law enforcement to take down a hierarchical structure of a group than it would be if people were just functioning on their own. But I could tell you, after I left in 1996, I never thought that I would see what we're seeing today.
I have to go back to some of the beginning in terms of how you got into the movement, because, as a 14-year-old, how did you couldn't have been picking up on those messages, were you, at 14?
To tell you this story, Chanda, of my recruitment at 14 years old, when I was standing in an alley in 1987 smoking a joint, and a man with a shaved head comes up to me and he pulls the joint from my mouth and he looks me in the eyes and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile." I didn't know at 14 what a communist was, if I'd ever met a Jewish person, or even what the word docile meant. And nothing that he said made sense to me. But what made sense to me and what was attractive was, for the 14 years prior to that, I felt abandoned by my parents, who didn't abandon me. They were immigrants who just had to work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. And I wasn't smart enough or mature enough to ask why I felt abandoned and what they were doing. He promised me a sense of identity, community, and purpose instantly. Because what he did after pulling that joint from my mouth and saying that is he asked me my name. And I was afraid to tell him because my last name is hard to pronounce, Picciolini, and it was mangled by every bully that I'd ever met. It unfortunately rhymes with weenie, so you could pretty much make anything go with that.
Kids are mean, yeah.
But he didn't laugh at me. He said, "That's an Italian name, and you should be proud of that." And that was all I knew. I'd grown up in an Italian household with Italian parents in an Italian neighborhood on the south side of Chicago where other families had emigrated to from the same villages that my parents came from. So I felt more Italian than I felt American, even though I was born here. I was the first. So when he said that, he started to say, well, your ancestors were great warriors and great thinkers and artists, and you should be proud of that. And somebody wants to take that away from you. And as a kid, the only thing I'd known, him offering me a sense of family, a sense of purpose to save something of great value that was being replaced. It was pretty intoxicating for a powerless 14-year-old to suddenly embrace that and be embraced, because they did deliver at first a sense of this, paradise on earth, and even the promise of paradise after death, sure, which is a pretty common, dangler for any extremist group.
So I think we have assumptions around who gets into mess as children, and usually there's not a dad around. And so here you have these hardworking parents that are raising you, likely to do the right thing. And meanwhile, you're being seduced and you're piling guns in their basement. Yeah. So what didn't happen in the house for you? Or what advice, either what didn't happen or what advice do you have for parents that are listening and concerned perhaps about their...
And I think that's the operative word, is listen, right? And we need to listen to our children from the youngest age possible, and listen for what they're not necessarily saying, what they're trying to convey that words sometimes can't. Because had, a baseball coach or a football coach come up to me in that alley at 14 years old, I would have gone with that person. Even if that skinhead, who was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead who promised me paradise, was standing right there, I would have gone with the baseball coach. That person just never came. So as a parent, I think we really need to empower our children's passions. We need to listen to them rather than dictate to them everything. We shouldn't shape them into a version of ourselves. We should find a way to amplify the version of them that we can help shape them into.
And so you didn't just get involved, you really emerged as a leader when he went to jail. The guy who recruited you went to jail. And so now you're leading in this movement. Yeah. So something about it was...
It was empowering. It was intoxicating. I had gone from somebody who had been bullied to shaving my head and wearing boots and having the bullies avoid me and cross the street. Just the act of me being involved, whether I believed it or not, whether I said anything or not, was powerful. And I took that, one step beyond. Every time I would feel intoxicated, I'd keep going. It was very much like a drug. I knew in the back of my mind it was killing me, that it was wrong, because I wasn't raised that way. My parents were immigrants. They were victims of prejudice when they came in many instances, so it wasn't part of our family DNA. But the further you go in, the harder it is to get out. Because you have to abandon everything about your identity, community, and purpose, and start over in a world that may not want you back.
And when did your parents become aware of what you were doing?
I came home with a shaved head maybe a week or two after that meeting in the alley, and I was proud to show them that, because it was now my way to hurt them, to get back at them for what I felt they had done to me. And they tried. They tried. And they didn't give up, and I'm glad they never did. It didn't work. It didn't seem to work at first anyway, but 8 years later, I was able to finally make my way back.
I had to wrestle down some emotions to sit here with you today.
I'm sure.
So for the harm you did cause, how have you repaired that?
It's a very important question, and I'm glad that you asked that. To me, repairing the harm that we've caused or that I've caused are the terms for forgiveness for me continuing to do that. At first, when I got out in 96, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to hide. And that lasted for a few years until I met somebody who I had hurt in my past, who I apologized to, and who told me, thanks very much for your apology, but that doesn't do a damn thing for me. Made me understand that I needed to seek forgiveness and repair the harm and the damage that I had caused.
Was this the coach?
This was the security guard at my old high school. Yeah, okay. Mr. Holmes. And
who was African-American?
African-American
security guard. And who you fought?
Who I had tormented in that high school. Everything from, fist fights, to protests in the hallways for a white student union, to picket up in front of the school. Yeah, it was not a good time. But one thing that he, on top of making sure that I would promise him to repair the harm that I caused and understand why I needed to, which I finally did. He also told me that he saw what he saw in me in every single student that he had ever worked with, white, black, Latinx, who could have gone in a direction that they shouldn't have. And what have I done? For the last 20 years, I have been trying to help disengage people from these groups, to try and mitigate, future damage, to try and prevent people from going down that road. But I've also worked in communities, and I've also, I think I've been a good ally to people of color in helping raise their voices and in standing with them, even when they couldn't stand there, to try and speak up for them, which is, not something I want to do or should be doing. They should have their own voice.
And just for our listeners to get a little bit of a sense of what has happened in Minnesota, before we started recording, you talked a little bit about being in Minnesota and Stillwater. And I kind of joked and asked, were you at the jail? You said no. And you came here for what reason?
So in 1992, early 1992, my wife at the time and I, when we were 20 years old, had almost bought a house here in Minnesota. And it was a hotbed back at the time for, this was before the internet. So music was a really big vehicle for propaganda.
So that's what the CDs were all about.
The CDs were all about that. So actually, Jeff had met me when I was here in Minnesota, when he was just kind of a kid coming up, and I had kind of graduated up. But there were, bands here. There were a lot of skinheads based here. The part of the organization that I was helping lead, the Northern Hammer Skins, that were part of the Hammer Skin Nation, a larger international group, were based here in St. Paul, in East St. Paul.
Mm-hmm. And so now, you're going across the country. You're here in Minnesota. And Keith, you are with him, and you're going to go talk to some of our neighbors and residents of our state. And there has to be something that you're seeing that makes you want to focus on this issue.
Well, we had a mosque bombed last year, bombed by some group called themselves a White Rabbit Militia. But we're also seeing, we're coming up on the first anniversary of the Tree of Life Synagogue getting shot up. 11 people got killed at worship. And then, of course, the Powell High Synagogue, people got killed there. Then, there was the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Heather Heyer, El Paso. Look, we got to do something. I believe that if people who recognize the dignity and humanity of others won't stand up and discuss and talk about this, it just sort of leaves. We're kind of yielding the field to the people who want to promote tribalism, negativity, violence. And by the way, don't forget the Second Amendment. These people are into guns. So it's important to try to push out and say, look, we're going to settle our political disputes at the ballot box or in the First Amendment free expression, not with guns and violence and bombing out here on the streets. That's what we got to do. I will tell you this. I definitely feel that we're going to. So in the state of Minnesota, I've been to Fergus Falls talking about this. I've been to Eastern Chaska. Been to. We were at Temple Israel the other day, and we were at the mosque on Friday, and we're going to St. Cloud. Now, St. Cloud was highlighted in the New York Times for being a particularly racist town. And, I know most people in St. Cloud are probably people mostly concerned about themselves and their own family. If we don't go there and engage people, or we just treat them like, oh, we're not going there, you let the folks who want to promote this tribalistic hatred, you let them build. Yeah. And we're not going to let them build, not unaddressed. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate you joining me.
It's my pleasure.
And I don't want people to think that I think that everybody in St. Cloud is a bad, racist, neo-Nazi, Ku Klux Klan, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe that. Even if they are, I'm willing to say, let's work together. Let's do something new. Because here's my thing about the Klan and the Nazi. They don't give a crap about white people. I don't believe they do.
You're right.
I don't believe they give a damn about your average white person any more than some plantation owner cared about some poor white person working on their farm. They're just using you.
And so, Christian, you talk about the potholes.
Right.
And so it strikes me that, there's a sense of belonging and connection and the tribalism, Keith, that you mentioned, and that you talked about like identifying the potholes. Can you share what that is?
Yeah, my theory is that people are led to these types of hate movements because of the traumas in their life, the things that they encounter on a daily basis that have kind of detoured them to the fringes where these narratives, where they're able to accept them. And potholes can be anything from, physical or emotional trauma to poverty, to lack of education, but even privilege. Privilege is a pothole if it keeps us isolated from the reality of the world, if it keeps us isolated from other people. There can be millions of different potholes, and sometimes there are a combination. But uncertainty is really what kind of bubbles up from all of those, or shame, even in some cases.
Yeah, and when you talked a little bit earlier about folks going underground and the boots to the suits, and I think just, when I talked with Robin DiAngelo, we talked a little bit about, we have this image of what a racist looks like, and they're like in the hood and they're like doing these god awful things. And it would be easy to walk away and say, well, the extremists and the white nationalists that exist today are the ones that are toting guns. They're threatening violence. They're going into places and taking lives. And I know that we're probably working and living amongst people. And I'm curious on the language, right? Like, because I'm hearing very coded language right now. And what should we be listening for?
Well, unfortunately, they're very good at changing and changing fast. So they're always changing their language. But, I would look at policies, right? If they're, especially in the political realm, if they're pushing for kind of isolationist or segregationist policies, everything from immigration to even foreign policy, and how we, either are an ally to, people we've treated well and have treated us well, or we are now siding with people who are, the not so good guys in the world. So, I think we need to listen for, words that divide us, rather than me pointing out specific words, because, by the time I say it and this airs, they will have come up with a new hand signal, a new word, a new way to talk about something.
A new meme or something.
Exactly. Let's look at the intentions of people. If the intentions are to further divide us or to isolate us even more, that's what we should be looking at.
Yeah. And what should we think about a guy like, say, Spencer? He speaks really fine English and went to Duke and PhD. And
I think that racists come in all stripes and try to hide their truest intentions with Brooks Brothers suits. And I think we shouldn't fall for it. Again, it's about actions and intentions.
Right. So we have folks of color and various religious backgrounds that talk often about their experiences, about not feeling included or being attacked or being victimized in some way, being in hostile work environments, all of these types of things. And often it goes unheard or not responded to. And does it take a former white extremist to get extremists out? Right? Like, I mean, is it possible, like, to Keith's point, like there's a degree of empathy and understanding. And I believe the gentleman that helped you from your school was an African-American guy, right? Like what happens when you encounter it? And I know that you're doing work to pull people out, but I don't speak the language, and so when you encounter it, what do we do?
Well, first of all, I should say it's never the responsibility of the potential victim to be the one to reach out with empathy. That I would never put that responsibility on people of color to do that, which is one of the reasons why I do it, to try and disengage. But let's be clear, what I do is a Band-Aid. I am a garbage man, trying to pick up whatever's left to salvage, right? If we want to beat this, we have to prevent it from happening. And that is changing our systems and our institutions to not be racist. It's making, policies equitable, and about making sure that social services are there for, from the day we're born, to make sure that we don't ever hit those potholes, or if we do, that there's support there to kind of help us navigate. That's what will defeat extremism, not, language that's completely counter to it, not debate, not punching, Richard Spencer in the nose.
Right.
Might make you feel good, but it does not change anything. In fact,
it
probably
didn't change his mind.
No, it makes things worse.
Yeah.
So what I would say is we need to create the culture that we've been professing that this country is, that we've never really attained. And that is equity, and that is justice, and that is a way for us to be great, but our greatness will only come through our goodness.
So, if you don't mind, I'm curious about your thoughts on this issue, the anti-Semitism. If I can be very candid, it kind of felt like United States used to really be a really anti-Semitic country. But then it seemed like we hit the 50s, 60s, somehow you just didn't hear about it as much. You didn't hear about the attacks on the synagogue as much. You didn't hear it even the religious folk who used to talk about Christ killing kind of stopped talking about that and became extremely pro-Israel, And I mean, this is, what I've observed. And now you got this violent anti-Jewish stuff. I mean, as a black person, I'm kind of used to it. I mean, it's just kind of the way it's always been this way. But it seems like the anti-Semitism is resurging. And in the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, they didn't say the blacks will not replace us. They didn't say the Hispanics will not replace us. They said Jews will not replace us, which struck me as odd.
Yeah.
How do you help us understand that?
There's always been, the base underlying theme of neo-Nazi or white supremacist or white nationalist ideology has always been the premise that Jews, even though they're a small population of people in the world, control everything, control the vast majority, which is a completely false, conspiracy theory that frankly dates back to 1903 when the Russian Tsar Nicholas put out a fraudulent document called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was this supposedly leaked document of a meeting of secret Jews trying to control the world. Well, it was a forgery, it was a fake, and he put it out during the pogroms of Russia. That propaganda machine has never stopped. In fact, that book was instrumental to my radicalization, and it's instrumental to the radicalization of Al-Qaeda members, of ISIS members, because it talks about, I'm putting up air quotes to your listeners, the Jewish problem, right? So there's always been that undercurrent. Why I've seen the far right kind of cozy up to Israel is because they really believe that Israel is theirs, right? The ultra-Christian kind of movement wants to reclaim Jerusalem and the land of Israel as the land of their religion.
I thought they liked it because, they thought, Israel is a state where,
they feel it's a bit of a what they call an ethnos.
Right. And they feel that maybe they could turn Idaho into one.
Yeah. Listen, that whole discussion is something that they'll use on both sides. They'll be anti-Semitic on one side, they'll be pro-Israel on another. The truth is, they don't like anybody. Like you said earlier, they're a very nihilistic worldview that wants to essentially flatten and scorch the earth and start over. And only the strong that will have survived that scorching of the earth will be the.
So they do want to burn it all down.
They do. They want to burn it down. They're not American. They're not patriots. They are anti-government. They are anti-democracy, just like I was 30 years ago.
Do you think our president has any role to play in the rise of this movement?
Yes. Absolutely.
Do you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, everything from his policies that were identical to mine 30 years ago to even some of the words. And if we want to get even more granular, to some of the tweets that he's directly put out that promote other accounts. It's called white genocide, which is a conspiracy theory about this great replacement, that whites will be outbirthed and replaced. He not only has promoted it, but he also has a responsibility as the leader of the free world, or maybe the former leader of the free world, because I'm not sure anybody thinks of America in that way outside of our own country anymore. He has a responsibility to watch his words, because his words, even though they're not directly telling somebody to do something, are encouraging people to commit these acts of violence.
Yeah, and you know, I could say so much about that piece of it, but there's a lot of leaders and people that are upholding the language, and I don't think this is a partisan argument at all.
Not at all.
What, based on the conversation we just had with the book, and then the tweets and the languaging, what role does social media have at this moment in time?
You know, social media is like that digital alleyway that I got recruited in, except that now it's a 24-hour all-you-can-eat hate buffet if you're hungry. It's very easy to find this information. It's not dark web. You know, some people think that, you know, it's hidden on the internet. It is 1 or 2 clicks away for any 10-year-old to find, whether it starts out on Twitter or YouTube or Facebook. You know, sending them down the rabbit hole is very, very easy. So a lot of this misinformation, you know, is coming from hostile foreign powers. Some of it is coming from, you know, internally in our own country. But it just keeps spreading and spreading and spreading. And it's getting into chat rooms where kids hang out. It's getting into depression forums. They're starting to target people in autism communities because they're going after people they know don't have those connections with others in real life, in the real world. And they're trying to win them over and establish their identity, community, and purpose in a virtual way.
Do you see a role for schools in combating this?
Absolutely. You know, I don't think that I wouldn't put all the onus on teachers to fix this because I think it is all of our responsibility.
Sure.
But young people spend so much time with teachers. They spend more time with their teachers in some cases than they do with their parents. And that's also where they engage with other people, and sometimes people that they normally wouldn't engage with in their personal lives. So I think it has to start from the youngest age possible. But we also need more teachers of color. There's a culture in this country where, you know, most teachers are white women, and that even goes for teachers in communities of color are white women. And there's no possible way, especially, you know, in this time when we're all learning the nuance of this and understanding how to talk about it, that a white person can fully, you know, explain or teach or even grasp the history that we have never taught in our classrooms. So we do need to recruit more women of color to teach.
Before we wrap, can you share, you have a new book coming out?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Thank you. Yeah, my book is coming out in February, and it's called Breaking Hate, Confronting the New Culture of Extremism. And it's essentially 7 mini memoirs of the people I've worked with, their stories of how they were radicalized and what I've done to help them come out. And it's a bit of a kind of a guidebook, so to speak, on my process of how I work with people.
And if we have any listeners or maybe getting in over their head, or they recognize that there are members of their family or community that are isolated and getting into this rabbit hole of hate and demonstrating behaviors that are concerning, what advice do you have for them?
I would say don't be confrontational. Don't be, aggressively pushing back. People don't respond well to that, especially people who feel, that the world is already against them, that are paranoid about the outside world. So it takes a lot of listening and listening for potholes, and then a lot of pothole filling. But if they feel like they're way in over their heads, they can always reach out to me for help. I work with people all around the country who can help intervene or provide advice for that, and they can just go to freeradicals.org.
Thank you. And Keith, our AG, do you have any closing comments for us? Any big dreams for Minnesota?
Well, I believe in that whole thing about liberty and justice for all.
Okay.
I just think it's a good idea, and it's good to see you on this wonderful podcast. And you seem like you're pretty good at this.
I feel like I'm developing. I appreciate all of your time and good work. I'm pretty clear that we have a road ahead of us, and I'm hoping that our listeners understand that we're not in a post-racial world. That part of the conversation is paying attention to those folks that are isolated, and that there is a degree of compassion and empathy and understanding that beneath the behavior is someone that's really crying out for help and identity and belonging.
If I could say this real quick.
Of course.
So as you know, you and I were together recently talking about how we need to deal with cash bail.
Yep.
And how nobody should have to sit up in jail just because they can't pay the bail.
Exactly.
That's ridiculous. This is pre-trial. It's crazy. We shouldn't do it. I believe in getting rid of mandatory minimum sentencing. I believe in saying we shouldn't. You can do what you want on marijuana, but making it a criminal offense.
Yeah.
is probably a bad idea. Certainly it has a disparate application in terms of racial justice. And I also believe, in the work of the Innocence Project, if we're going to say we believe in the second chance and we believe that people who committed felonies should be able to vote, how are we going to not say to somebody who has been involved with the neo-Nazis or the Klan, hey, they apologize, they want to come back, they're ready to make a life different? How are we going to say no, not except you? I'm not there. I'm like saying let's be that prodigal son, invite her back to our community. Not all of them are going to be as articulate as Christian. Christian can break it down. He's writing books. He's sharp. He knows his stuff. Some of them are going to be just people who going to just go back and just lead very ordinary lives. And I ran into a friend of mine the other day who happens to be an ex anti-racist person. Okay. And he said that he was working in Chicago in a restaurant, and a lot of his friends who also worked there were African Americans and Latinos. And one guy who was a fry cook it's hot, midsummer in Chicago can be hot, takes off the t-shirt and there's, swastikas and tats on them. And then these dudes, they getting their testosterone macho up, and they're going to figuring out what they're going to do to him because, So he says, let me handle this. He walks in there and says, hey, man, what's with the tats, man? We don't go for that. He says, that's not who I was. I'm not that guy anymore. In fact, I wish I could get rid of him. That was, I think, he just described that to me, and it brought me back to when I handled the cases that I handled. And I'm like, look, second chances is second chances, right? Anyway, that's all I want to say.
Christian, do you still have your tats?
They've all been covered up. I have actually a suit of armor tattooed over most of my body. There's one tattoo that I left, and it's on my forearm here, and it's not anything that I think anybody would notice as being related to white nationalism or white supremacy. They're Viking runes that are tattooed around here. And I made a conscious effort not to cover them up because in 2000 I was walking through the mall. This was only a couple of years after I had gotten out myself. I hadn't talked about it. I was walking through the mall and a guy stopped me and he said, hey bro, nice tattoos, white power. And I pulled him to the side and I talked to him, and that was my first intervention. I didn't even know I was doing it at the time, but we talked for 20 minutes, and by the time we separated and left, he wasn't ready to leave, but he was saying, that's pretty cool. I respect you for doing that and walking away, and I hope that individual found their way out. So I left it as kind of a way to establish credibility with the people I sit across the table from. It doesn't offend people because it's actually a co-opted symbols that don't mean anything, bad. So I use it to really kind of, to make that connection. But I just want to go back and answer a question you asked earlier. You said, what should we do? We don't recognize these people. And I think it's our responsibility to really just be compassionate to everybody and show empathy for everybody that we meet, especially if we don't know who they are, and especially if we don't think that they deserve it, because I think that they probably are the ones who would need it the most and might be able to benefit from it the most. That's not to say don't hold people accountable for their actions. Everybody is, and I've held myself accountable for 20 years. But I agree with Keith, and I think that if we provide that little bit of space for people who are genuine, who want to disengage, because I've never met a white supremacist who didn't want to leave. They may not have vocalized it, they may not have said it, but they wanted to, because it is a dead-end road, and once you're in, there's nowhere to go. But there's also nowhere to escape if you want to.
Mm-hmm. So when I think of you, I think of American History X.
Ed Norton movie.
Right, right. Like I think of that, and I just think that we're not, because I think what that movie did was a pretty good job of showing what was happening at home and the struggles and the dimensions of this. And so I appreciate you today providing some dimension to this conversation, and welcome to our great state.
To order Christian Picciolini's new book, Breaking Hate, please visit breakinghate.com. You can follow Chanda on Twitter at Chanda S. Baker. To listen to more episodes and learn about upcoming events, please visit conversationswithchanda.org. This is Sue Pak Kienitz. Thank you for listening to Conversations with Chanda.